I received a phone call from Jeff Rack probably around maybe a good 3 years ago. And it was just a phone call that I received out of the blue regarding Jerry Zorthian. And that name, of course, rang a bell with me because Jerry and I had probably met in the summer of '79. It was about the restoration of some of his work, so naturally I was intrigued by this whole conversation and somewhat surprised. And this one job in particular involved his rendition of a gouache painting that he had done probably around 1939. It was not only torn and ripped in many places, the paper itself was decayed. It had been sitting around drying, so the image was really compromised. So at first I was really hesitant in even taking this because the condition of the paper made it actually would crumble in your hands. Jerry's style, or restoring anybody's painting, is always a challenge. But again, too, you're not working with oil where you can change the stroke of your brush. You can add so much material, but just working with the gouache, it's the amount of water that you probably put in. But knowing Jerry, I think, was the magic to this. In my short conversations with him, I probably met him possibly 4 times, visited the ranch, and of course from there, everything was go, and I felt comfortable, and I really wanted to do it. But once we got it all laid out, if you restore a project, you know that you have to just put everything in its place. And then I think I realized that a lot of it was so damaged, there was probably a real probability that I'd have to make up some of the pieces myself. But there was so much debris on the painting, so much dirt, so much, as they call frass, I believe. The first process was try to save what you can, and that is a process of just sandpapering it with a light sandpaper and getting all the loose paper debris away from it, all the animal droppings, things like that, some of the paint that was worn away, and you want to reveal the real painting, the real intention of the artist. I didn't know if I wanted to stick with gouache, if there was a possibility, if I can use something else. But no, I wanted to be original to the project, so I used gouache. So that was really the process of putting it together, seeing what was available, seeing what I can restore, and just doing away with as much of the bad part that was decaying as possible. So getting rid of all the mold, getting rid of the watermarks is probably the first things that you do. And removing the mold in the back, which is just important because it's part of the paper. So there's a process that you can do with a little bit of moisture that you can get that to dry and then later on erase some of it. But again, you have to go through the same process on the back to ensure the preservation of the paper and the integrity of the paper. Otherwise, if the front is done only, you need that back. You need everything to have a clean, clear surface to work on. The gluing process was quite a technique because that's actually when you're doing something to the paper, so there's no going back. And we use a museum glue, which is very, very good because there's not any acetone in it. There's not anything toiling in there that is going to break, that is going to crack. You want to preserve that paper without having anything that is going to form a seal on it. So what you do is you glue it. You glue as many of the pieces that you possibly can that will hold together, again, realizing that there's some that is going to have to be completely eliminated. So that's when I decided to scrape off some of the excess paper, some of the good paper that I sanded off, so it just becomes a very, very, very fine dust. So after removing that, you can actually use the type of museum glues and lay it in there and fill in all those cracks. Using the actual pulp from the original paper and using these museum glues would give it a nice buoyancy, a nice flexible bend to it. As you know, on a torn piece of paper, if you were to glue a piece of paper that is like this, it's great. But this is almost a puzzle that had to be glued together. So you had so many high ridges and low ridges. So getting that to be a flat surface to work on and paint, above the pulp of the paper that I use, that's when I applied gesso to fill that in. So that sort of allowed it to have that smooth surface. It didn't have a ridge of paper, a ridge of gesso. It just had one clean surface. This allowed my paints to be solid and to be consistent with the original painting. When you have it flat and it's filled and there's not a crease or any ravines on it, you can actually paint it with the gouache and you'll have the same reaction that the original paper had. This way you won't have to darken it, light it. It'll accept my paints the same way the original paper was supposed to without having an overlap. So I used as much as the original paper as possible, and I think the results spoke for themselves. All right, as far as trying to mimic or copy Jerry's style in the painting itself, you had flesh colors from the American natives in there. You had some of the colonial people, and or even their what they were wearing. So you do mix your colors and everything you test. So it wasn't just that I mixed the colors and applied it to the artwork itself. All of it had to be copied on the original paper. I used as much as the old paper that could not be saved, and I tried using the combinations of the colors that I believe that Jerry used. So everything was tested well before. It wasn't just randomly mixing a color and applying it to the painting itself. It was a continuous process of trying to mix the colors, knowing that they might change in a week, 2 days, 3 days. As far as, don't forget, painting, restoring is light and its volume of paint. So having to look at these and see how they're going to react is probably one of the most important things in restoring. To recreate the bottom of the gouache painting, making the decision to not use the bottom because it was so badly decayed, that was a hard decision to make, and just trying to imagine if I can do it myself. But again, once you make that choice, you just realize, again, there's no going back, and it was necessary. It had to be done. There was really no way to restore the bottom. So it just becomes a matter of measuring the pillars and all of his lines in between. If you notice, he did a lot with pencil. And even just copying somebody's pencil line can sometimes be difficult. Having the lines connect on everything is important, because this is almost, for myself, a mathematical picture. There's nothing to play with. You have to follow lines that are there. You have to follow Jerry's lines that were exactly there. And I think that might have been one of the most difficult parts for me, because I like, if you're restoring the project, you get to play with things, but you're just using paper and gouache. Those are the only two things that you're using. So there's really not much room for error. There was actually 3 pieces: the base, the pillars I call it, which the image is put on, the image of the early settlers and the American natives, and the top. All of it was glued on one solid piece. I believe the top of the mural was salvageable, not like the bottom, it was pretty much decayed. And getting that to fit on, sort of like a crown. So when that was placed on there, and I did see that the measurements were coming out well, again, that was very rewarding. Adding the new base to the image and also the crowning part, which was saved, was really the go-getter. And I think seeing that the whole image could come together as one was, again, very rewarding. And the restoration process became full. This painting now was able to be moved, rolled up, and possibly to put in a tube. And I think that response that I was getting from the painting itself telling me that this is going to work.